Bonnie, feel free to take the floor.
Hey, well, I'm Bonnie. I'm one of the board members at the Prairie State Humanist group. So thank you for joining tonight. For our topic for our presentation today is energy storage in the new energy world. Mr. Mark Frigo, tonight's speaker, currently is Vice President of Energy Storage for Nexamp. Nexamp is a leader in the clean energy space, offering solar and energy storage solutions. They own and operate all of their solar storage projects and manage every stage of the process. Prior to Nexamp, Mr. Frigo led the successful establishment of RWE energy storage business in North America. The Congress of the United States has also recognized Mr. Frigo's energy expertise by having him testify to the Subcommittee on Energy on the role of energy storage in the nation's electricity system. So please welcome Mr. Frigo.
Well, thanks all, and thank you, Bonnie. Good to be with you tonight. I'm going to share my screen here. So, and bring up a little slide deck that I put together, and hopefully, can you all see it now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, yes, as Bonnie mentioned, I lead the energy storage group with my company, and energy storage is one of these things that's just it's become a much bigger tool in the, call it the energy arsenal going forward. And I thought, tonight it'd be good to talk about a number of things. One, just kind of setting the stage in terms of energy and combating climate change overall, and where does renewables and the electricity sector, and more specifically energy storage, kind of fit within that. And then I'll kind of drill down a little bit and talk about energy storage more specifically and its importance to the new energy world, because the energy world's changing, especially over the last 20 to 30 years. Then I'll talk a little bit more about some of the benefits of storage. Then I'll get into more technology. That's the section that I need to have in there, or else the scientists and the engineers in the group here will fall asleep. Then I got some project examples of how this actually stuff works. And then we can go into a wider question and answer period. And maybe what I'll do is, as Bonnie mentioned, I'll kind of stop after, a couple of these sections here, and maybe we can ask some questions kind of midway through. So, so just setting the stage in terms of climate change here. People ask, well, what should I be doing to fight climate change? And the answer is anything and everything. And the problem is there's no silver bullet. Anything and everything has to be done. It's obviously an existential threat. I think, almost everyone agrees that climate change is a huge problem and will be a driver of many other of the ills of the world going forward if we don't do something about it. But climate change is not just caused by the electricity sector. It's not just power plants that we use for electricity. It's also climate change is caused by the energy that we burn in the transportation sector, whether it's jet, the planes that we fly on, the cars that we drive. It's caused by industry, the making of goods, just our homes, commercial and residential, and then also our agriculture too. Obviously, the amount of stock that we have in this world also is a contributor of climate change. So to solve the problem, you really have to address every one of these sectors. I work in the electricity sector, so this is kind of my little contribution to fighting climate change. And more specifically, I obviously work on, as I mentioned, energy storage. And traditionally, electricity could not be stored. The electricity grid as we know it, and it's been for the last 100 years since Thomas Edison put together his first power plant, the Pearl Station in New York City, the grid was developed without storage for really a just-in-time delivery system. So generation is ramped up and down to meet what we call electricity demand, or what we call load. And those constantly have to be in a state of equilibrium. And as demand or load changes, the generation has to change so it stays in equilibrium. If it doesn't stay in equilibrium, the system collapses. And that's what we see when some of you remember back to the Great Blackout of 1965, or the crisis that they had in California back in 2001, and some of the more recent outages out on the East Coast. So generation is the electricity typically goes from generation, goes through high voltage transmission lines. Then the electricity gets stepped down to a lower voltage into distribution lines, which you see out in your street, which then gets distributed to where it's needed, in the homes, businesses, factories. But the world, the energy world has really changed. It's become much more complex over the last 20 to 30 years. As I mentioned before, the electricity system was more of a one-way system. Power was generated in power plants and it was sent to end users. But now, and this is what you can see is what's happening more and more now, is we have what's called the energy cloud. So you got computers, and when you have computers, you have databases, Google, the Microsofts of the world, you have the cloud. These are massive users of energy. They need a type of electricity that is higher quality level of electricity. It's the data center and your computers need a better quality of electricity than your washing machine does. Unless your washing machine has more and more electronics, which it does now. And that combined with the fact that you have a greater amount of renewable energy coming online in the form of wind energy, offshore, onshore. You have solar, but this power is unlike nuclear or other types of coal or natural gas and fossil power, where it's intermittent. It does, the sun doesn't shine all the time, the wind doesn't blow all the time, and so that your source of supply is much more variable. You have a greater amount of electric vehicles out on the road, and so you have a massive amount of demand starting to come from people's homes. People are putting what we call distributed generation. They're putting generation right on their rooftops in the form of solar panels. And so the interaction of all these things has really changed the electricity sector as we know it from the days of old. And the way the electricity moves now in this much more complex system has increased the need for energy storage. And energy storage really hasn't, with the exception of pump hydro, which is really the only energy storage that we really had viable in the past, where you have an upper reservoir and a lower reservoir, and you pump water up to the upper reservoir in times of low demand, like in the middle of the night, and then when you need it, you let the water go down the penstocks and create electricity when you need it. But the problem with pump hydro is you can't put reservoirs just anywhere, and so there was not a lot of good storage technology that was able to be implemented in multiple locations in the past. Well, that's changed, especially over the last decade. And technology, market, policy innovations have gradually allowed storage to overcome a number of those challenges that it faced in the past. And those challenges you can put into one of three buckets. There were technical challenges in terms of using batteries, for example, that we use. There were performance and life expectancy type of issues where they just didn't last very long. They didn't hold a charge very long in terms of rechargeable batteries. The efficiency of them wasn't very good. However, with technology, that's improved dramatically over the years. There's also been economic challenges in the past. That quite honestly, the cost of lithium-ion batteries was very significant and cost prohibitive to use it on a large scale. Well, the cost of those lithium-ion batteries have come down significantly, and it's no different than other types of technology like wind and solar, where it's come down in terms of a cost curve. And then finally, there are regulatory challenges, and those are improving. There's still a number of challenges, and I'll explain what that means. In the old system, and I'm going to back up one slide here. In the old system here, hopefully you can see my cursor. You were basically, I'll go back to the rules and the regulations set up by the federal government and the states was, in terms of electricity, was the rules were you fit into one of three buckets. You were either a generator, you were either transmission and distribution, or you were load. And the rules that applied to you depended on what you fell into. Now here comes along a new technology like energy storage. And what are the rules that you apply to it? Well, you ask the question, well, is it a generator? Well, yes, you have to, you can once you charge a battery, you can, dispatch a battery and create electricity and send that out into the grid. So it can be a generator at one point. Could it be a transmission and distribution? Actually, yes, it's actually being used, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as what we call a non-wires alternative, a transmission and distribution alternative. And it also, you do have to charge the battery, so it can be a load. So it can be, so it's effectively falls into all three of those buckets. So what are the rules that you apply to it? Well, that's made things complicated too. Now the federal government has come out through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has come out with some orders in the last number of years that have really started to allow the country to implement energy storage solutions by trying to get the rules set up so that a technology that doesn't neatly fit into any one bucket can be more advantageously used, because everybody recognizes the value associated with it. But if the rules aren't there to support it, then it's difficult to implement. So let's talk a little bit about the applications or the benefits of energy storage. Everybody knows, and I think this is the first thing when you think of energy storage, what it's good for. It's effectively an enabler of renewable energy as a baseload and peaking capacity. So obviously it can take power from a generator like a solar project, where you can see here on the chart here, depending on the hour of the day, obviously during the middle of the day, the sun's the greatest, and that's when you're going to get your most generation. However, the problem is that doesn't necessarily mean that that's when the time for greatest electricity demand is. So remember when I talked about electricity has to be in a state of equilibrium in the grid, the generation doesn't necessarily match when it's needed at the best. So here comes energy storage, where you can clip some of that energy off the high generation times, store it in a battery, and then you could dispatch it later at more valuable times, which is typically for us in the Midwest is in the late afternoon, because it's still warm out. People are coming home, they're turning on microwaves, or turning on televisions. And so that's typically what we think of the use of energy storage. But energy storage actually provides many more services that people don't realize. And this is I call this the energy storage wheel, but effectively it provides many other services, and they can fit into one of three buckets. Starting kind of at the 12 o'clock and moving over clockwise here, the first bucket in the green is it provides services to what we call the independent system operators or regional transmission organizations. These are the effectively the grids that provide that manage the transmission and distribution, getting the electricity from the generators to the loads. And there's a number of independent system operators that operate throughout the United States, but energy storage can provide services when it comes to making sure that that grid is resilient and that it's stable. It provides things that we call ancillary services, which you never learn about. But for instance, frequency regulation. The grid has to be kept at a certain frequency, 60 hertz here in North America. And if the grid falls out, whether it goes above or below 60 hertz, the grid can collapse if it's not kept at a constant frequency. So energy storage can provide services by putting in a short burst of energy into the grid to be able to keep the grid at 60 hertz. It can provide other things like voltage support, black start, which is to get things moving. If everything is down, you need some kind of electricity that can start just like that, and energy storage can do that. When you move to this blue part here, energy storage offers services generally to what the utilities are in charge of, which is the transmission and distribution of electricity. And it can be used, as I mentioned before, for what we call non-wires alternatives. So when you have to make an upgrade to a system, whether you have to upgrade or build a new substation or new transmission and distribution lines, that is a very expensive and time-consuming proposition. And it's very difficult to do because you're crossing many people's properties. Sometimes for transmission lines, you're crossing different states with different jurisdictions. And so one of the things that energy storage does is it helps to defer or eliminate the need for some types of transmission and distribution upgrades. For instance, and I'll talk a little bit about this further later on, but there's a project that we have up in New York where there's a substation overload. And instead of building out the substation and making it bigger and costing more, they can put in a lower cost battery to solve the problem of the substation overload. And then finally, it can be used ultimately by customers, not just consumers like you and me, but industry and commercial customers. There's things called behind the meter type of applications where people can put batteries, or businesses can put batteries behind their meter to manage their electricity consumption. A lot of industries and big electrical users, unlike you and I, will have to pay multiple rates depending on when they use electricity during the day. Well, they would like to be able to drive down the cost of their electricity usage by shifting power in their facility. They could also lower their bill costs by reducing demand charges. And if they have renewables on site, such as on-site solar, you could pair it with that and store the solar and use it when you need it. And of course, and it could be used as a backup generator, no different than a diesel generator as well. So storage can provide many other services, not just the shifting of the enabler of renewable power. Maybe what I'll do is, let me just take a quick pause there and see if there's any questions that folks have.
That
I do
seems-
have a question.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
You mentioned there are regulations about energy storage. Can you give us some examples, like fire station or in terms of population in the city?
So in terms of what the government is doing to help enable energy storage to be implemented into the electricity grid? Or are you talking about regulation in terms of
regulation.
installing it?
Yeah, regulation. Some regulation examples on having an energy storage facility like in the unpopulated area or in a
Okay.
populated
Yeah, so energy storage facilities have to be, you just can't put them everywhere, anywhere without any type of approval process. It's an energy storage facility that we build is no different than any other power plant. And when a power plant gets built, it has to go through a long development process. And that process, basically you have to secure land and make sure that the land is sufficient and doesn't and is located in an appropriate area to put a facility like this. You can't put it in a wetland. You can't, just like you can't build, buildings in certain areas. You also have to go through an interconnection process with the local utility. But, and more specifically to your question, Bonnie, you actually have to go through a permitting process with the local authorities that you're locating the storage in. So typically that is at either a municipal or a county level, and you have to get effectively what most people call them as a development permit, which means we would have to put together very detailed plans of what the project is, all the aspects of it, how big is it, what are the safety characteristics of it, what is its design, what is its what are the fire suppression systems that are installed in there, and it goes through this approval process with the local local county or municipality. In some states, depending on the size, that actually might be done on a state level, like in New York. But those are the folks that you either can get your permit or you can't. If you can't get your permit, you can't build it. And as part of that permitting process, there's typically the local fire department will get involved with providing advice to the local city council in terms of making their decision.
Mark, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Years ago, an idea was floated about using electric vehicles as a grid-based storage batteries. Is this option still being considered, and how would it be implemented?
Yes, that's actually a very good question. It is still being considered. It's being considered in a couple different ways. The first way is it's being used as being considered as what we call a distributed resource. So it's being studied as, everybody has a battery, or if people have an electric vehicle at their home, effectively they have a generating source at their home. And could that be, tied in when it's not being used to pull energy to the grid if the homeowner wants to potentially use it? That's actually being studied. Now there's obviously a lot of issues with that in details that got to be worked out, right? You got multiple homeowners. For that to make a difference to the grid, you have to tie together multiple homeowners. To do that, you need to be able to communicate and pull that off at the right time, and so there's those logistical things. So but that's still being studied. Actually, there's smaller batteries that are being installed at people's homes now. The Tesla has what's called a power pack that can be installed in people's homes, that can be tied into an electric vehicle, but it's also a battery that they, keep on their wall in their garage or in a storage space. And that's more of a permanent type of battery. That's actually being used to tie together with other homeowners to provide energy to the grid as well. That's actually something our company is looking into. And then I think the third thing that's actually being looked at, and this is being studied down at Argonne National Labs, is because they have a kind of a little mini lab where they're taking used, well, I should say, call it pre-owned batteries from older electric vehicles, and basically mounting them on walls or in larger packs to reuse. Because when just like your phone, when your battery never really dies in this thing. I mean, eventually it would, but when you get a new phone, your battery still has probably got 40 to 60% of power left in there. And, that's valuable. And so there's this afterlife of batteries that are being studied as to how do we use these in a second, call it a second use situation, where you take some of those old batteries, and instead of setting them ultimately to a recycler, could you continue to use them in the second life purpose for the grid?
Mark,
Yes.
I got a comment or a question for you. The utility is also looking at being able to control your load, like where they would turn off your air conditioning for 10 minutes
Correct.
an hour, and they will pay you to allow them to do that. And that handles their peaking issues.
Correct. That's called demand side management. So they can, if they can, with the use of technology now, they can control things remotely. They can they can turn down your thermostat. They can, cycle your air conditioner less often, so it uses less energy. And that by doing that, they not only they can lower the amount of generation that they need, and thus, if you have a coal plant, the amount of pollutants that go in the air, just by better managing the demand side instead of the supply side. Because in the past, it was always, well, let's just generate more electricity. Now you can better manage that by managing not just the supply, but the demand side as well.
The other issue generally in that sort of area is when these people put PV panels on their roof, and all of a sudden they're generating electricity and they just dump it on the grid. That's got to drive the utility crazy.
It does. It actually does drive the utility crazy. The reason being is that they're losing control. They're losing control, not just technically, because it's hard for them to see, all these mini power generators out there that never existed in the past. But it also, it's effectively, it goes against their business model as well. I mean, they're not getting an energy supply charge being paid by the end user. So there's that kind of a dual threat to them as well. I have talked to some. There's a lot of solar panels on roofs in the state of Arizona. If you ever go down there, and that's because Arizona had a program where it was economic for people to do that. But what the folks in the utilities have told me is it's very difficult to manage the entire grid with that, because now they have all this generation that's literally out of their control. So how do you manage the grid to keep it, the frequency in check so that, the grid doesn't collapse? So these are things, it's doable. The utilities and the grid's doing it now, but it does add a layer of complexity in terms of managing the system, that the system is much more complex than it was many years ago.
Yeah, you were talking about the Yachtos. I believe there's the Ford 150.
Correct.
They say they can hook up your house and get a 9 kilowatt hours for.
Yeah, I had heard like you can run your house for 3 days off of that vehicle.
And then
I was actually looking at, I have 2 hybrids right now, and my next car will be a fully electric car. I had an old house, and before I could buy one, I had to upgrade my electrical because I was afraid of burning down my house. But that's done. And so now I'm ready to, when at the right time, I'm ready to buy one. I've been looking at potentially the F-150. I think that would be actually quite a popular product.
And I also saw, it must have been a small company, a startup. They were buying up leaf batteries and setting them up. I mean, basically just as they come out of the car, and they were setting them up near solar farms and wind farms and just taking off the excess energy at a cheap rate. And then when the bid comes in, try and bid it onto the network to supply energy when it's needed. So
Right, absolutely.
so they're buying cheap and selling high.
Right. So yeah, that's definitely a business model. You know, we go back to this slide here. That's what's called energy arbitrage. That's buy low, sell high. And energy storage can obviously do that. And a lot of storage projects, I built some down in Texas that not only provide frequency regulation, but they also, it buys power when it's cheap and we sell it when it's high, when it's needed. It's a good business model. So why don't I continue to move on here and talk a little bit more about actually getting into the technology here. And some of this might get a little sideways a little bit, but the scientists and engineers always demand this kind of information. So I'm going to provide it here. So when we design these solar plus storage facilities, and we can have a storage only facility too, but when we put it with a renewable facility, we typically will size it to be about 40 to in some cases 100% of the solar size. So if the solar project is 10 megawatts, we would size it anywhere typically from 4 megawatts to 100 megawatts, depending on where we are in the usage. And the duration of the battery, they started very short durations up to 5 years ago when I first got into storage. And that's only because that was the only thing that was economical at the time, where there were 15 or 30-minute batteries. Now the standard is the batteries that are being installed, and lithium-ion batteries are the choice. And I'll explain why in just a little bit. But they're typically about 2 to 4 hour duration. So if a battery has 4 megawatts of power, it can discharge that 4 megawatts for 4+ hours if necessary. And when we put it with the solar project, we can design it one of two ways. We can make it AC coupled, which is where you put in 2 inverters, and you can charge from, but that allows you to charge from the grid, or you can just put in 1 inverter that goes out to the grid. But and there's benefits in terms of efficiency, losses, and value to the grid versus not. So it depends on the situation and the services that you're providing, that you might have a different design. Now, there's, as I alluded to kind of early on, there's different types of energy storage technologies. I've already mentioned pumped hydro. There's batteries, and within batteries, you have multiple types of batteries. You have lithium-ion batteries. You have what's called flow batteries. You have lead acid batteries. You have zinc batteries. Lithium-ion batteries are, as I mentioned before, are the technology of choice right now. The other types of storage technologies that there are out there are electromechanical type of technologies, big compressed air, where people are compressing air in old salt caverns and then letting it out. Flywheels. I've seen some pretty bizarre type of technology. I have a good friend who works at a company called Energy Vault, and they use these huge tower cranes and they lift these big concrete blocks, and they lift the blocks when the energy is cheap and not needed, middle of the night. And when the power is needed, they let the blocks go. And while the blocks go, they're connected to a generator, and they create electricity that way. I've also seen railroads up on an incline, and they park a train up at the top of a hill, and then let gravity do its work. And then you have thermal, solar thermal, heat thermal, in terms of capturing heat and energy in water and steam. But like I said, batteries are really the technology that's of choice, and more specifically lithium ion. Why? It's because the storage that's being used for the grid purposes are the exact same batteries that are being put in electric vehicles. They're being manufactured in the same factories, and they're following that massive cost curve down. And so they have a huge cost advantage compared to all the other technologies. In addition to the huge cost advantage that lithium ion batteries have, the maturity of the technology, we know what they are, we know how to use them, works well. You can get a lot of power in a very small space, which is why they're used in consumer electronics. But that also is good because we can put storage near where it's needed, whether it's in a city or high load centers. And it's the footprint of something like this is much smaller. These are siting considerations. So you don't need 2 huge reservoirs. You don't need a salt mine for a compressed air facility. So because of all that, lithium ion batteries really are the technology of choice, and probably will be that, in my guesstimate, for the next handful of years. What's out there on the horizon 7 years from now? Who knows? I was talking to folks down at Argonne National Labs who are looking into the next generation of storage and what's potentially the next super technology. They couldn't tell you beyond 6 or 7 years. And what they're really focused on is really lithium ion batteries and the chemistries involved with lithium ion batteries. Supercapacitors are actually something that potentially holds quite a bit of promise for the future, but they're right now not commercially viable on a large scale. Now, this is I'm going to ask everyone to go back to chemistry class in high school here. So when we talk about lithium ion batteries, not all lithium ion batteries are created equal. There are a number of them that have different chemistries, and I'm not going to go through everything here, but the two batteries that are the two chemistries that are used the most in energy storage applications are NMC, which is nickel manganese cobalt batteries, and these are the batteries that are pretty much used in all consumer electronics. The reason being is because the energy density is really high in those. You can pack a lot of energy in a small space. And these were being used at the beginning for many electricity grid applications as well. And they're being used in automobiles as well. But there's a big move for electricity purposes from NMC batteries to lithium iron phosphate batteries. And lithium iron phosphate batteries, their energy density is not as great, so you can't pack as much energy in a small space. So you need more space, but the footprint is not that much greater. So therefore, you could still use it in quite a few places. And there's also the safety considerations when you look at LFP batteries, and when compared to nickel manganese cobalt batteries, the safety characteristics are a little better, and you have less of a chance of thermal runaway. So to talk a little bit about kind of how this is being implemented in real life in terms of projects that I'm actually working on, that my company's working on, and tying it back to that wheel, is storage actually can do multiple things, can actually offer multiple services out of the same project, in fact. And it could actually do things sometimes at the same time. For example, this project here called Mercy Renewables, this is actually a hospital in Massachusetts where we're putting PV cells on the roof of the hospital, on the carports of their garage, and then we're also putting storage there as well. And the hospital is using this for basically three things. To lower their electricity bill by they have to pay multiple tariffs based on when they use electricity, so they can shift around when they can use their electricity, especially their self-generation that they get from the solar. But also they can lower their demand charge, and they could actually they're going to use it as a backup generator instead of a diesel generator that they have because obviously hospitals are critical infrastructure and they need to stay online. Over to the right here, this is a solar plus storage project called Montague Road. It's also in Massachusetts. It's actually being used for two reasons. One, the solar is being used to charge the energy storage, but then the energy storage is being used to maintain the grid in the northeast part of the United States by keeping that frequency the frequency at 60 hertz. And it's also providing what's called resource adequacy, which is another name for capacity. So the electricity grid has to maintain enough capacity to meet the highest demand peak at any time of the year. And so, and what this allows the utility to do is to maintain a certain amount of capacity that if demand ever spikes, that they have the generation necessary to be able to provide it for their customers. So that's a couple of examples. Another couple of examples, I alluded to the one on the left here before. This is up in upstate New York. This is actually a combined solar plus storage facility. And the storage facility is actually being used to, instead of an upgrade that the utility needs to make to a substation. It's an area where the substation, the existing substation gets overloaded. So when demand spikes in the area, the substation, it becomes effectively a bottleneck, and enough power can't get through to that substation. So then they have to have rolling blackouts in times of peak power. So in those times when peaks are needed, the substation would allow the max amount of power to go through, but also it'd be supplemented by generation from the storage facility, from the battery at the same time, preempting a number of blackouts from happening. So here's an example of where the battery is actually being used as a transmission and distribution asset. And then finally, an example here, this is actually a much larger storage facility. This is a storage only facility. There is no renewables tied to it. It's quite big. It's 20 megawatts, and it's a 4-hour battery, 80 megawatt hour. To just give you an idea, 1 megawatt is enough power for about anywhere from 500 to 1,000 homes. So, that's potentially up to 20,000 homes being provided by this one battery. But its usage is basically threefold. It's being used for frequency regulation in the grid up in the Northeast. It's being used for that resource adequacy, making sure that capacity is available if power prices, or I'm sorry, if demand spikes. And it's also being used, and we mentioned this earlier, for energy arbitrage, buying low, selling high, to support the business case of the battery. So that's it. I just wanted to give all kind of an overview of how energy storage fits into the greater electricity, system, how it's an enabler of not just renewable power, but other problems that and services that the grid needs. And ultimately, it's a tool that allows the grid to operate better and cleaner, which helps combat climate change. So thanks, and let's. If you got any more questions, let's hear them.
I have a question about hydrogen.
Sure.
So I understand that the current way of producing hydrogen today is a dirty, inefficient process that involves natural gas and creates more pollution than it solves or whatever. But if some resources could be devoted to finding ways of producing hydrogen directly out of water or air from solar power or other renewable energy, wouldn't that be a valuable and possibly better way of, for example, fueling vehicles than batteries that involve toxic chemicals and disposal problems and things like that?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's like I mentioned, there is no silver bullet. And I'm not saying that storage, or batteries are a silver bullet. It's a tool, right? And what you're referring to is green hydrogen. So, or what the industry is calling green hydrogen now. And the company that I was with for 14 years, RWE, is just starting to really get into this, where they are actually using in Europe a lot of their hydropower, I'm sorry, not hydropower, a lot of their wind power, especially offshore, to basically use that for power, for electrolysis to be able to pull hydrogen out of water, to be able to then use, because obviously when you burn hydrogen, it's a very, it's clean burning. Obviously that's no silver bullet either. You gotta build the infrastructure, to be able to house it safely, to transport it effectively. But I do think green hydrogen probably is going to be a much more used tool in the future. How far away is that from it? Like, from us having cars with green hydrogen and being used elsewhere? I don't know. It's still, the process is still is pretty expensive. And you need to, obviously do a lot of it to, just like any manufacturing process, to be able to get that down. But I do think that does have, does offer quite a bit of promise for the future, certainly.
Mark, just as a favor, could you turn your screen share off so we could see each other?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, stop share. There we go.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So years ago, we heard about possible planting of solar panels into highways as you built new highways, so that the sun shining down on it would create electricity. And it seems to me with the energy storage, if you had those, I don't know if you want to call them substations, on the highways where you already have your right of way, that would save you a lot of headaches, where you could channel all the electricity from those solar panels on the highways to those stations and store them there. And then your only issue then is the wiring out of those stations to the communities or the businesses. But you would solve that problem you mentioned earlier in your presentation of having to get permits and right of ways to build that energy storage facility in the first place. So I'm just curious whether that's been thought of.
Yeah, I to be honest, I haven't followed, using them in, highways and roadways very much. However, I do think you will see more and more PV products being built as like dual purpose. Okay, like for instance, I think it's Tesla now. where they're actually making roofing shingles that are actually PV. So it's effectively, it's not just a separate PV panel that's getting bolted to your roof. It's the actual roof itself. And I think, you know, as technology moves on, where you can be able to kind of design these dual purpose generation systems that are more distributed, because that's the biggest change that's happening over the last, you know, 30 years is which I think is really fundamental for fighting climate change, is really moving to more of a distributed model where generation is done much closer to the source. So there's, you know, less waste because there's a lot of waste in electricity that goes long distances.
The other thing we could do, guys, is these solar panels that are in the roadway, we could have an induction link to the car and skip a lot of intermediate distribution there, right? I suspect that the energy density isn't what you'd need to power a car.
I'll tell you what, there are a lot of good ideas out there. As you can imagine, as a company that buys storage technology and implements it, you know, like I said, we don't manufacture the batteries ourselves. We buy them from the Teslas, the Samsungs, the LG Chems of the world. But we're the ones who build the power plants and put it all together and own and operate it for 30 years. So you can imagine anybody who's got a better mousetrap. I've seen a lot of them come through my door, and there's a lot of great ideas out there. You know, it's a question of what's really commercially viable versus not. And I've seen some pretty funky ideas. I remember one person who brought had a prototype, a pilot actually built, where effectively it's kind of like a compressed air type of storage system, where he put in a huge bladder underground, and the weight of the earth would push down on it, and so it effectively you had a massive whoopee cushion underground, and that became their energy storage system. So, you know, I've seen all kinds of I shouldn't say kooky, although some of them are kooky, but a lot of good ideas. But, you know, at what cost, right? There's a lot of good technology out there. It's always at what cost.
Well, one of the hangups are the not only the local but the state governments who are, you know, paid off to prevent some of this stuff from happening.
Yeah, they're definitely, as all of you know, we live in a country where the states have a lot of power. You know,
Right. I was looking at specific. I was going specifically at Ohio, and they're anti-solar and anti-wind,
right?
And trying to
very political, and some states are very progressive. California's always been a trendsetter when it comes to renewable power. They've been a great lab, and to California's benefit, they've also been the guinea pig for things that don't work well, but at least someone needs to do it. And they've always been a good state to do that. But New York, Massachusetts, now Illinois with its recent energy legislation that's just passed, it's been great. You know, it's up to the states to really push this stuff forward, because when the states push this stuff forward, it really gets implemented really well within the states and gets rolled out quite dramatically.
I have a company question. So you guys do community solar farm, and can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so community solar it's a nice, and we have that available in Illinois. Not all states have community solar programs, but Illinois does. And the way it works is a company like Nexamp builds a solar farm, and you as a consumer, and you know, most of us who live in Northern Illinois have ComEd as our you know, local utility. You have the ability to participate and subscribe to that solar farm. And how that works then is that on your bill, if you look at your bill from ComEd, you have a number of charges on there. You have, and it's basically broken down into generation or supply charges, transmission and distribution or delivery charges, and a whole bunch of taxes. And in that supply charge, you can basically, you'll get a credit on your bill so that you're not paying your supply charge to ComEd. You would basically be paying your supply charge to that solar company. So effectively, like I participate in the Nexamp solar farm that's down in the southwest, well, far southwest of the Chicagoland area, down by Saumonuck, and so I would pay. I get two bills in the mail. I get one from ComEd, so I still pay ComEd delivery charges and taxes because they got the wires coming to my house. But then I don't pay them my supply charge. I pay my supply charge directly to Nexamp in support of that renewable energy. And so it's a good alternative for people who want renewable power, but don't want to put solar panels on the roof. I mean, I don't. To be honest, I live in, like I said, I live in an old house here. I'm a little nervous about putting solar panels up on my roof. I don't know how good my roof is, but so this is an alternative to that and still be able to participate and support renewable energy.
So Mark, what do you do when the sun goes down? Then you just go to bed or what?
No, I still get it. Actually, the way the program works is my supply. It doesn't matter when I use the energy. It is, and this is where the state comes in and puts these programs in place. Is that they effectively the solar farm injects all their energy into the grid, and then it's just kind of a financial transaction between myself and the company, and then the utility, or actually the grid operator, will manage overall on a high level, will manage that overall generation and load to keep it in balance.
There are other suppliers out there that do that.
Correct.
It doesn't have to be a community solar farm, for example.
Correct. Yeah, there's other third party, call it energy marketing firms, that actually, like Constellation is one of them. And I remember getting, I'll get things in the mail from Constellation. Constellation will buy power from larger solar projects in the Midwest or Illinois here. And effectively, by having your supply being provided by Constellation, and from a billing perspective, it works in the same way that I mentioned before for community solar. You get a bill from Constellation, you pay them, you don't get a bill, you don't pay your supply charge to ComEd, but Constellation is buying power from larger solar projects. So that's another alternative as well. The beauty about community solar is you actually subscribe to a specific project. So, a certain percentage of this Saumonuck solar project is subscribed to me. So I can go out there and look at it. When you're dealing with energy marketers, they're providing you power and they're just buying it, but behind the scenes, they're buying power from the grid, from solar, from wind, or even from natural gas plants if necessary.
So a lot of suppliers have to tell you where they're getting it from. So the supplier I've been going with for the last several years says it's 100% wind power.
Correct.
So plus they're lying, and I doubt they are, because they'd be
No, and they are providing it directly from. So what they're doing is they're going out and they're buying. They're setting up these large, or they're signing these large power purchase agreements from like a large wind farm or from a large solar project. Those projects actually when they generate the electricity, put it into the grid, and then it's a financial transaction between you and this company. But effectively, the money works its way back to the owners of the wind farm or the solar project.
And they're actually now cheaper than ComEd.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. For anybody who tells you renewables is more expensive, is a bunch of baloney. Renewables is much cheaper than it's virtually zero cost. This is why the nuclear plants do so poorly from an economic perspective in Illinois. Is the wind farms are generating power at below zero and at zero cost, and a lot of these larger old nuclear plants and coal plants have to continue to run at a certain level, and they have to pay costs to keep those things running.
Now, interesting, Kane County is about to put a solar farm in on county property. If anybody knows the area, it's behind the Judicial Center on Route 38. Quite a few neighbors who live maybe a quarter to a half mile away from there are trying to scuttle it because they're afraid that the solar panels that will be on the ground will lower their property values.
Yeah, well,
Won't it cause cancer too.
Yeah.
But they haven't gotten into that part yet.
Yeah,
Kill the birds.
It's interesting when I on the wind side, you have these same arguments too. Things called shadow flicker, where if you follow, when you look at a wind turbine and it casts a shadow when it's turning, and if you look at the shadow, you can get dizzy. As I tell people, if you stick your head out the window when you're driving a car down the interstate and watch the lines go by, you're gonna get dizzy. There's been study after study after study that has shown that these property value issues really are pretty much unfounded across the country. There are like I said, there's no silver bullet. The best thing to do is not to use energy, to be honest. But solar does take up a footprint. For every 1 megawatt of solar panels, you need about 5 acres of land. That means you got to cover 5 acres of land with solar panels. With wind turbines, there's some land usage there. Wind turbines do kill bats and do kill birds, although it's not as many as what people think. It's still much less than cars, cats, power lines,
buildings. More
So,
birds crash into buildings than are killed by wind turbines.
yeah, actually, the number one killer of songbirds is house cats.
Feral cats, right. Now, I was also going to bring up, Scott and I have an acquaintance, I won't call him a friend at this point, who is extremely pro-nuclear. Everything should be nuclear. We shouldn't scuttle any other form of energy production. And he will spend literally paragraphs or hours telling you about the horrible chemicals involved with the production of photovoltaic cells and how horribly inefficient wind generators are and how bad they are for the environment because you can't recycle the turbine blades.
Yeah, it's my dad's like that. My dad worked at Argonne National Lab for many, many years, worked in the nuclear industry for many, many years. He's retired now. And I hear the same, he gives me the same arguments, although he supports renewable energy, of course, because it's employing his son and keeping me from living in his basement. But the nuclear power is a great technology when it's done right, and we know how to do it right. The problem with nuclear power, and I've waffled with this over my career, to be honest, is the probability of something bad happening is very, very low. But when it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong. And we've seen this with Chernobyl. We've seen this with Fukushima. And to say that, you can never engineer and totally de-risk something to zero. And so, the question is there potentially a better way? And my view is I do think nuclear power has its applications, but for consumer power, I tend to think that there's a better way.
Well,
But
the
that's
big
my
thing
personal opinion.
about nuclear is it's not clean because of the waste, and that's there whether
Well,
something.
correct. But hey, it is correct on solar PV panels. I mean, let's be honest. There are toxic metals that are used in their production. How do you fix that? Well, and the same is true with energy storage as well. We haven't gotten to this point yet, but there needs to be put in place a good recycling process and system that when these things come out of use, that when these projects get decommissioned, that the battery modules, that the solar panels, that they can be recycled and that as much of that as possible can be remanufactured into new goods and services, so that you eliminate and try to limit the amount of mining that's going on right now. And there's a significant amount of mining that's going on for rare earth metals for these types of things.
Make
And
you
that-
more
and that-
efficient
and
than
that
to
has to be
start
done.
with.
Mark, can I ask you, the Department of Energy, didn't they build a meltdown-proof reactor out in Idaho and they proved that it worked? And I'm wondering, didn't we buy like 10,000 nuclear warheads from Ukraine? What's going to happen with all that? That's just going to sit around for 100,000 years? We might as well use it.
Yeah, it's now you're starting to get beyond the limits of my of my knowledge here, and yeah, it's if the labs are right. I mean, my dad always told this to me. He's like, it can be engineered. It can be engineered correctly. The problem is, and I got a good book if anybody ever wants to read it. There's a book called Midnight in Chernobyl, which it's a blow by blow discussion of what went wrong in Chernobyl and why. And while yes, they used an old design that was not a very good design compared to Western reactors, but a lot of the problem had to do with just the way it was constructed. Construction teams not having the right materials, it being constructed, improperly, shortcuts being done, and ultimately, human error was involved with that meltdown. So, can you make a totally human error proof system? I think it remains to be seen.
Mark, I'm a big advocate of nuclear. In fact, when Howard was starting to talk about it, I thought he was referring to me. He came up with some new ideas that I hadn't thought about. The thing about nuclear waste is it's very compact and you've got it all right there on the site. A coal-fired plant, a fun fact is that a coal-fired plant emits more radiation than a nuclear plant. And that's in terms
Right.
of the, the radium and the uranium that's in the coal. And it all goes up the stack. And you said, well, there's not much. Well, yeah, there's not much, but that's right. There's not much. It's not something to worry about. And Chernobyl is as sophisticated as a fourth grade science project.
Right.
I don't argue. I'll talk to you about Fukushima, but not Chernobyl.
Okay, Rich, we're really not going to be, I don't want to open this up to a debate of
Okay.
nuclear versus non-nuclear.
Yeah, like I said, I to be honest, I really waffle with nuclear energy, and it's a great technology, and it has its place, and I do think research still needs to continue to be done. I'm a big supporter of the national labs to continue to look to see how we can actually harness it in the future.
I have a couple questions about battery technology. So there have been some stories I've seen in the news recently about iron batteries. And I don't know if you've seen those or not, or if you have seen
Yes.
them.
Yeah, those are actually, when I mentioned before, when that one slide I had where I said the industry is moving away from the nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries to lithium iron phosphate batteries. When they talk about the iron batteries, that's what they're talking about.
But still lithium.
So
Okay.
yeah, it's still a lithium ion battery though.
Okay.
Right.
But they
like I
were,
said,
if I read the article, they said they were going to be good 4 to 12 hours, where the lithium is only about 4 hours and they're done. I mean,
yeah,
charging.
the duration of batteries with the technology continues to grow. I mean, there's going to get a point where it's like how long do you really need a battery to last? There's kind of a point of diminishing returns.
There was one that I even seen where they had basically iron balls and they were letting them rust. So they took they rust and they unrust them somehow, so they generated. That was their storage mechanism.
And then the other question is about, maybe somebody already asked this, but I think I have a slightly different idea or question about it, and that is recycling of batteries. You know, people throw away a lot of lithium ion batteries when they stop working and whatnot. Are there efforts to do a better job of reclaiming some of that chemical and incentivizing recycling?
Yes, but I don't think it's good enough. If I didn't get into I'm not working in renewables to get rich, so I don't have a whole lot of money to invest. But if I was invest, I think the recycling industry is one that I think is poised for growth in the long term, because somehow, there's only a finite amount of minerals and rare earths, and you just can't continue to mine these things. Mining is terrible for the environment, as many of you know, and so there's got to be a better way. So the technology is there for recycling, not just of lithium ion batteries, but alkaline, regular consumer batteries.
Oh.
But the systems to be able to collect those from households, just doesn't exist. And that's something that it's not just how you recycle them, it's how you get them from where they're being used to make sure that they're not getting tossed in landfills and getting them to the recycling facility.
Yeah, I believe there was the executive from Tesla who was in charge of batteries that started up his own company to recycle the batteries. And he recovers the nickel, the lithium, and what is it, the magnesium, whatever. In fact, he's even setting up a shop right in Tesla's factory, because when you're making batteries, you have waste when you're making them that he's able to grab and recycle. But before you can make a real profit, you need batteries out there to come in quantity to do it, mass production.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're not there yet.
And we're not there yet, exactly. I mean, how many electric vehicles and right now, I mean, how long has the Prius been on the road for now? 10, 15 years?
Yeah, but it's only like 10 or 12, 15 kilowatt hours.
Yeah, so we're not to the point where there's massive amount of automobiles, EVs or hybrids really coming off the road just yet. And so you're right, you don't have that throughput to get to that scale. But it's certainly something for the future. The electricity industry uses a lot less batteries than the automotive industry uses. And so the automotive industry is the one, so the Teslas of the world, the Mercedes-Benz of the world, the BMWs, they're the ones that, the Volkswagens and GMs, they're the ones that kind of leading the charge in terms of finding a way to recycle these, because they're trying to figure out, okay, when these things start coming off the road after so many years, what are we going to do with them?
Well, even that, they're going to stretch them out. Like right now, they may last 5 or 10 years, but they're talking if they get batteries that can go 200,000 to 300,000 miles. I mean, you could have a car for your entire life, you know, not wear the battery out.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. The first project I built down in Arizona, the manufacturer, which was Toshiba, would only warrant the batteries for like 10,000 cycles. You know, a cycle is every charge and discharge that you have. And as technology has improved, they're warranting the batteries for 15, 20,000 cycles. So they're becoming more and more comfortable that the batteries will have a much longer life as time goes on.
Particularly if they get the solid state, because then you reduce the risk of fire tremendously.
Oh, absolutely. And that is, you know, and that's one thing that keeps me up at night, to be honest, is you know, these lithium ion batteries do have are a fire hazard. They do, you know, there are systems in place for protection against that. But you know, and they're tested and they're, you know, UL certified, or the testing, they go through UL testing certification. And but yeah, that, you know, that's always a concern. This is one of the reasons why you see this move to lithium iron phosphate batteries, is you know, their thermal characteristics are thermal runaway characteristics are better than nickel manganese cobalt batteries.
I just want to mention before we go that you were concerned about putting solar panels on your roof, but they will do an inspection to make sure your roof can withstand them. So.
Oh yeah, I know. It was one of those things. It's like, well, I can put them up on my roof and they'll probably be fine. I'm sure they'll be fine. And, you know, and I'll, you know, but there's always that kind of the back of my mind, what happens if, you know, and I got a big tree hanging over. I said, it might be much cleaner if I just bought it from a solar farm way over there.
Your microphone's really
Mike,
cutting out or something.
yeah,
there.
yeah, all of a sudden, all we get are getting our static from you, Mark.
Is it, sorry, is it any better now?
No.
No. Okay.
When you shuffled around, Mark, it got goofy.
It's like,
Better?
no, it's like you've got a loose cable or something.
Yeah, try and plugging it in.
Yeah, let's try that. All right, let me, how about this? Any better?
No,
No.
sorry.
I
No.
I can dial back in.
Well,
Good meeting.
Yeah, we're about at our stopping
Okay.
point anyway. So your microphone did a good job of keeping time. You know, I do want to thank you. This was superb, really. It was a lot of content, a lot of relevant content, a lot of thought-provoking stuff. It's very encouraging. I just, you know, I look out there and I see a lot of these things on the horizon about alternative energy generation and storage and distribution and recycling and, you know, environmentally conscious activities related to all that. I just hope we can keep ahead of it before, you know, the oceans drown everybody. But really excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you to the 20 of you who tuned in today. And a couple of spouses involved too. So more than 20 people. Really great program. Thank you again, Mark. Maybe we'll have you back in a couple of years and give us an update.
You're more than happy. Hopefully you can hear me, but thank you. I appreciate you having me. I enjoyed the discussion.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Remember, our science programs are not this weekend. They're going to be the following weekend. So I'll ask Howard to send out a correction about that. I'll take care of that tomorrow. And we'll see you all again soon.
Bye, thank you.
okay, good night, everybody. We'll be closing the room down now.
Okay.
Good night.